Thanks, Peter, for those kind remarks. I'm not one of the top ufologists in the world, however. I'll defer to like Bruce Maccabee and Mike Soares and some other people like that. Thanks, everybody, for coming here. It's been 2 years, and it's good to see you all here, gathered together to talk about our favorite subject. Peter, thanks for putting this on again, and for all your hard work for getting us here, arranging the room and everything. Good. Appreciate that. My PowerPoint presentation has got so complicated, I had to have an assistant here, my wife Susan, to page through my 45 slides or something. So I owe a great debt of thanks to her for preparing my PowerPoint presentation that you will soon be seeing here. Believe me, it was a long, hard road to get these things looking as good as they are on these PowerPoints, and it's up to Sue. It's all because of her that they look so good. Otherwise, I was thinking I was going to stand up here and just have to sort of hold things up like this. You see this statement here from the government, this just wasn't going to work. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of my talk. It came from the UK and other observations. What I wish to do is go a little bit into, and just a very little bit, because most of you folks, I'm sure, have read the Director of National Intelligence report that came out in June. I want to just point out a couple things in that report, some statements that are maybe amusing is a good word. And then I will go up to that, and then we'll talk about some briefing cards that the government has issued that were supposed to be used by spokesmen who were going to be talking about this report. And so that's sort of a behind-the-scenes look. And you're going to hear some stuff here you won't hear other places, let me just say that. And maybe you'll be glad you don't hear them other places after having heard it here, but nonetheless, after we go into the briefing cards, then I'll have some, and this is what I think is almost maybe the most salient part of the talk, will be to show what the government did or did not know 70 years ago compared to what we just saw and read in this report that came out on June 25th. They missed Kenneth Arnold Day by 1 day. It's too bad it didn't come out on June 24th, but nonetheless it didn't. Then after that, we'll go into some, I'll show you, sort of reorient the talk into a sightings-oriented talk there, and show you where we stand with sightings in the MUFON system, and sort of by implication how sightings are going in the whole country, whether or not people report them to MUFON or not. You'll see the magnitude of the sightings we're talking about. And then I'll finish up the last third of the talk, maybe the last half of the talk, depending how fast this first part goes, with some interesting sightings that happened fairly recently for the most part. So I think, and hopefully you will enjoy that. Yeah, all right, so I guess we can proceed on to the first one here. I have some notes here in case, I'll have to do some reading here for you, because I can apologize for the fact that I had to use a certain amount of text to make the points I'm going to make today in this talk. Yeah, you might say that the text complicates things. Okay, here I just put the cover of the DNI report on here for you. I think Ben and Tony were talking about this a little bit. It's all of 9 pages long. The first page, page 1, is the title page. You're looking at it. The last page was a restatement of the relevant part of the funding bill that was signed by President Trump at the end of last year that mandated that this report be filed 6 months later. So that's page 2. And the penultimate page was definitions. What is a UAP, and what is some other acronyms that appear in the report. So 3 of the 9 pages were taken up with rather things that weren't right on topic. So we have 6 pages that are drawn to the actual phenomenon. I will say this about the report. I think it's the first time that a government report has come out that is unclassified, that doesn't belittle the subject. And everybody here probably knows how UFOs have been the butt of jokes for 70 years, and every time a scientist would be put in front of a microphone in the 1950s, the 60s, or the 70s, it was always to castigate the people who were witnesses of sightings. People like Barry, to say, oh, they don't know what they're looking at, they just saw a sundog, or they saw a mirage, or they saw a satellite, you name it. they used everything they could to just deride the topic and to make light of it. And this report came out, and I didn't see any ridicule in this report to speak of. So I applaud them on that. Did they tell us anything new? That's the question we'll be looking at here as we go into this document. Yeah, you can go up to the next one still. Oh, then they did have a press release that accompanied when the report came out, also from the government. I'll read from just the 2 lines I've highlighted here that I thought were kind of neat. It says, then the first highlighting there says, today the Director of National Intelligence delivered to Congress a preliminary assessment of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and the progress that the intelligence community and the Department of Defense has made in understanding this threat. When you say threat, that has a meaning in a military sense. And it was something that for the previous 70 years in the UFO subject, the military, and specifically the Air Force, never wanted to use. They never wanted to portray the UFO phenomenon as a physical threat in the air. It might have been a threat for other reasons, like it could interfere with intelligence activities in the United States or something like that. But was it a threat to aircraft or a threat to facilities on the ground? That was something they would back away from and never talk about. It's the Air Force's job to investigate threats to the country, but nonetheless, they never quite phrased it as a threat. And the last paragraph then says, to that end, the Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, is going to take steps to formalize the UAP task force that was set up in 2020. In other words, they were going to make, the UAP task force was set up in 2020 just to start looking into UFO reports and how they were coming in from the Navy and to investigate them. But it was never expected that the UAP task force would be a permanent little body in government. But now this press release indicates that that's what they want it to become, a permanent adjunct, sort of like Blue Book in a way, that always is looking into cases. Oh, here's a book that just came out literally a month or 2 ago, that if you're interested in knowing the backstory of ATIP, which we've all heard about from the New York Times article in 2017 with Lou Elizondo, this book is by the first director of ATIP, a guy named Lakatsky. He's an engineering physicist, I think, or something like that. A physicist and an engineer, whatever. Lakatsky was the first director back in 2008 or so. And he and George Knapp, and who was the third author? Colin Kelleher, who worked with Bob Bigelow, have come out with this book. And it reveals, it's pretty eye-opening in some respects. I haven't read it entirely, but parts of it are disturbing. There's a paranormal current that runs all through this, a paranormal thread that runs through these sightings. Hence, the Skinwalker Ranch plays a kind of a big role in this book. You can get it on Amazon like you can get everything else. And so we'll move to the next one. Yeah, here's a couple statements from the DNI report, I'll call it, Director of National Intelligence report. And here's what they said. And some of these are directly contradictory, so that's why I have these up here, and I'm going to read them to you. The report says on page 2 that various forms of sensors that register UAP generally operate correctly and capture enough real data to allow initial assessments. Well, that's a great thing. That's a good thing. So we have these sensors that are gathering information. They're on airplanes or conceivably fixed structures on the ground, that when an unidentified phenomenon is encountered, these sensors are going to pick up any radiation, light waves coming from it, conceivably heat, IR, UV, that type thing. Then statement number 2 there says, a majority of the unidentified aerial phenomena were registered across multiple sensors. Well, they dealt with 144 cases, 143 cases, they said, that the UAP task force looked at. So a majority of those is something over 70. So that's another incredible statement, that multiple sensors captured some kind of data from these objects, whatever they are, okay, that were appearing to pilots. And then we go on to statement 3. It directly contradicts the other 2. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force considered a range of information on UAP, but because the reporting lacked sufficient specificity, ultimately recognized that a unique, tailored reporting process was required to provide sufficient data for an analysis. Well, they just got through telling us a couple pages before that the reports didn't necessarily lack sufficient specificity. They were captured in a majority of the reports by multiple sensors. That's hard data that scientists and engineers like to look at. So that's a weird statement. These two statements, 4 and 5, follow one another in this report. They're both on page 4, but the first statement, number 4, is a sentence, and literally statement 5 is the next sentence, so I'm not skipping several pages. Statement 4 says the sensors mounted on U.S. military platforms are typically designed to fulfill specific missions. As a result, those sensors are not generally suited for identifying UAP. Okay, contradicts the first couple statements. The very next sentence, sensor vantage points and the numbers of sensors concurrently observing an object play substantial roles in distinguishing UAP from known objects. That sounds like identifying them as a UAP, and determining whether a UAP demonstrates breakthrough aerospace capabilities. Optical sensors have the benefit of providing some insight into size, shape, and structure. Those two sentences are 180 degrees apart. They just don't make sense when read together. And then page 5 of the report has this one sentence, I think it's a heading, and a handful of UAP appear to demonstrate advanced technology. That to me is the most defining statement in this 9-page report. That's an incredible statement. Can you imagine Blue Book ever saying something like that? Or Project Sign or Project Grudge? It's hard to imagine they could. Maybe we'll find out differently as we go on, but that's an amazing statement that we might be dealing with an advanced technology. It's implied that it's not Chinese or Russian, that type thing. Okay, so yeah, I can go on to the next one. Like I indicated earlier in the preface to my talk here, they came out with a bunch of briefing statements, briefing cards that that DoD spokespeople could use to answer questions from the public or from the news media. And every time something happened in the UFO field last year, a whole new set of briefing cards would be prepared for them. So if the Navy came out and said that those videos that had been released unofficially were now official videos, that prompted a set of briefing cards. And all these briefing cards came out by through a FOIA request, by the way, by John Greenwald and his Black Vault. If John Ratcliffe, who was the director of national intelligence, went on Fox News to talk about UFOs, which he did, there were briefing cards prepared for that. When the 60 Minutes piece appeared with the pilot Fravor and the woman, I think who was his co-pilot, or a wing pilot, appeared on 60 Minutes, that prompted briefing cards. Obviously, the DNI report prompted briefing cards. They had all these questions that they would make up, and they would provide answers for them. So here's, for example, question 2. What is the definition of unidentified aerial phenomena used by the Navy? Well, any aerial phenomena that cannot be identified, that's what a UAP is. Oh, that was borrowed from the UK. When an unmanned system is not immediately identifiable, we refer to it as a UAP. That's what they wanted their spokespeople to say. Question 4, you can go to the next one, Sue. And most of these turned out to be almost kind of annoying. Question 4, what happens with the investigation of the aviator reports? Can we see them? Again, hypothetical question, but it's the kind of question you can see somebody ask in the news media. The information obtained from each individual report will be investigated in its own right. Any report generated as a result of these investigations will by necessity include classified information, therefore no release of information to the general public. Okay, we go to the next one. Has the Department of Defense, DoD, found any evidence of extraterrestrial technology? The examinations into incursions by UAP are still ongoing. The department does not comment on intelligence matters. You can see where this is going. So sometimes they'd ask questions these hypothetical questions, and they wouldn't even answer the hypothetical questions. There's probably 100 of these questions, and I just picked out from a variety of these cards these particular questions. They're not all from one set of briefing cards. But yeah, they wouldn't answer their own questions. And sometimes the questions that were hypotheticals almost seemed to annoy the person that was writing the answer. It wasn't quite, how dare you ask that, but you get the tone that they're just annoyed with just the hypothetical questions. Can you tell us anything so far about what's been found out about UAP? We do not comment on intelligence matters. And finally, I think the last one I had is one more. There's one more after this. Why did you establish the UAP TF, the task force? They established it to improve the understanding of and gain insight into the nature and origins of UAP incursions into our training ranges and designated airspace. That's a good answer. That's specifically why the UAP TF was organized. Actually look into the phenomenon. As we collect additional data, we expect to close the gap between identified and unidentified and avoid strategic surprise regarding adversary technology. I hope so. Are the classified and unclassified versions, this is a good question, of the DNI report substantively different? When the DNI report came out in June, the 9 pages I spoke about, there was also a classified report that was given to Congress, because they are the ones who asked for this report to be generated in the first place. And supposedly, supposedly the classified and the unclassified are basically the same. But I think the unclassified I've read was 9 pages longer, or maybe it was 16 pages longer, or maybe it was 7, something having to do with the two versions equaled 16 pages, or there were 16 additional pages, whatever. Nonetheless, it doesn't seem that they ever discussed any specific cases or reports. And they had 143 apparently that they couldn't identify. None of those were brought out in either version of the report from the reading I could do. And the DNI report apparently was written by 2 people. And I read somewhere that my reading of it was that they didn't get started writing this report until like May, and it was due the next month. I sort of spoke about this publicly before, and I said it's almost like a lot of us did in college. Wait till the last moment before we write up the report. We knew it had to be submitted when we began the semester. We'd wait till like the last week and write it up. It's almost what they did here. There's not a single word or sentence in that report to lead anyone reading it to think that there was any such thing as a UFO phenomenon before 2004. It's like it just sprang out of nothingness in 2004. They never even give a nod of the head to the fact that this government had been involved in UFO research since 1947, and thousands of reports have been collected. You'd never know that. But okay, that's another topic. It's annoying, but it's another topic. And okay, so you can go on to the last one here. And here's the sort of bottom line statement here that they had in every one of these sets of briefing cards. We take incursions into our airspace seriously by any aircraft, identified or unidentified, and investigate each one. Okay, that's news. If there's 1,000 cases, they're apparently looking at each one. And so that's sort of a good thing. So if you read between the lines here, or read some of the lines at least, you get the idea that they are taking this thing seriously. There's no humor in this report at all, except the unintentional humor that they didn't expect to be there in the first place. Okay. Oh no, not that again. That's what we first thought maybe when this report was going to come out, that it would be a case of, oh, nothing to see here, folks, move on. We've been through this before. There's nothing to the UFO phenomenon. That wasn't quite the case, as I just got through saying. But in a sense, as you will soon see from the next set of text I have here, maybe it was. Maybe it was the same thing all over again. And so we'll go ahead to the next one here. What I've done is, the top statement there is a report from the DNI report. Here I refer to it, just to confuse everyone, as the PA, the preliminary assessment. But it's the same thing. It's the 9-page document. So I'll have a line from that. I knew I brought this laser pointer for a reason. And then I'll follow it up with statements from some earlier documents, and most of the time it's 70 years before. And I'll briefly explain what these are as I go through them. So a statement from the preliminary assessment says, most UAP reported probably do represent physical objects. Another rather amazing statement. In 1947, there was a letter written by Nathan Twining, who was an Air Force general, head of the Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patt Air Force Base at that time. Twining wrote a letter, and he said, and a famous line in that letter was, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious." Okay, 70 years later, they said the same thing in the DNI report. A top secret 1948 analysis of flying object incidents in the US that came out in the 1980s, I think, it was released by FOIA. It wasn't a public document in 1948, but it was known to people who had the right clearance. That report said, it's a fairly long report, some type of flying object has been observed. Okay. And next one, too. Again, the statement from the UAP report. In a limited number of incidents, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. We see from the Twining letter, the second little subparagraph there, the reported operating characteristics, such as extreme rates of climb, must be considered evasive. Again, from the flying object analysis in 1948, top secret. The objects observed there, and they're referring to mysterious cases over Scandinavian countries in 1946, had unusual range and unusual performance characteristics. It's almost the same language they used in the preliminary assessment. You should be getting a little bit of an inkling that this was something that was known at a certain level in the government when this phenomenon first started in the wake of Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947. Let's go to statement 4. From the preliminary assessment, we were able to identify one reported UAP with high confidence, and the others remain unexplained. They had 144, they could explain one as a balloon. The others, we don't know what they are, but they apparently, at first glance, didn't reveal any information. Again, the analysis of flying object report, 73 years before. Therefore, it appears that some object has been seen. However, the identification of that object cannot be readily accomplished. And here's an amazing statement I found. We saw before that the UAP acronym came from the UK. Here we see in a report before the Air Technical Intelligence Center, that would be this statement right here. That was given in 1952. The report was called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, a Briefing, 1952. I guess the UK borrowed it from us, and we're just giving it back or something. But anyhow, so that's what I mean. Whoever wrote that, the DNI report, doesn't know UFO history. UAP has been in use a long time. It didn't come from the UK. They took it from the Condine report from the UK, probably, which came out around the turn of this century. Anyhow, this ATIC report has this amazing sentence, or sentences. This means that counting both the 13% on which we had insufficient data for analysis and the 26% in which we could not attribute to any known cause, there have been 272 sightings of which we have record that we are unable to explain. With these, nearly 40% of the total, we have run up against a completely blank wall. When General Samford held his famous press conference in Washington, D.C. in July of 1952, in the wake of a rather amazing series of sightings that occurred over Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base, that area, they had the largest press conference since World War II. The military delivered that day. Samford said this, and again, it's a kind of a famous line in ufology. However, and this was a public statement, there have remained a percentage of this total in the order of 20% of the reports that have come from credible observers of relatively incredible things, and we keep on being concerned about them. So they're telling us over and over again, at least Samford here admitted, something really strange is going on. Okay, so you go on the next one. Statement number 6 from the PA report. Some UAP observations could be attributable to developments and classified programs by U.S. entities. We were unable to confirm, however, that these systems accounted for any of the UAP reports we collected. In other words, they couldn't prove that it was another branch of the government, the Air Force maybe, that was flying some kind of exotic technology around the skies. Well, go back to 1947 again. A lot of reports were coming in. The Air Force asked the FBI to interview UFO witnesses, at that time flying saucer witnesses, because they just didn't have the manpower to do it at the time, or people were tasked for other things. They needed the FBI's help. So somebody in the FBI properly wrote a letter to the Air Force saying, before we get started interviewing all these people, how do we know we're not just wasting our time in interviewing people who have seen top secret US technology that's flying from Mojave or Edwards Air Force Base or something like that? We need to be assured before we go on and waste our time or spend any time actually looking into these sightings. So General Shulgin at the Pentagon at the time wrote back to J. Edgar Hoover, again, a letter that would not have been a public document. It was for people cleared to see it, in this case Shulgin and J. Edgar. And Shulgin said, a complete survey of research activities discloses that the Army Air Forces has no project with the characteristics similar to those which have been associated with the flying discs. So there you have it. The early sightings weren't secret documents. Shulgin is not going to lie to J. Edgar Hoover. He's being clear. The objects back then eluded aircraft and flew circles around them in exactly the same ways that they're flying circles around and eluding aircraft now, 70 years later, with 70 plus years of technology behind them that they didn't have in 1947. And they're still flummoxed by these flying objects. Rest assured, they're not another branch of the government or some exotic aircraft that are being flown out of Area 51. And then we can go to the last one here, Sue. This is another rather incredible statement from the preliminary assessment. Although most of the UAP described in our data set probably remain unidentified due to limited data or challenges to a collection processing analysis, we may require additional scientific knowledge to successfully collect, analyze, and characterize some of them. Amazing statement from the preliminary assessment, saying that, again, the technology seems to be beyond us. Well, back in 1948, the analysis of flying object incidents in the US said, proof of the existence of a foreign development of this type of flying object that's being seen would necessarily introduce considerations of new principles and means not yet considered practical possibilities in our own research and development. Almost the same line. A report to the Joint Intelligence Committee on UFOs by Charles Cabell in 1949, and Cabell was director of Air Force Intelligence at the time, said, and this again would have been before just a select group of people, there are numerous reports from reliable and competent observers for which a conclusive explanation has not been made. So far, so good. Some of these involve descriptions which would place them in the category of new manifestations of probable natural phenomena, but others involve configurations and described performance which might conceivably represent an advanced aerodynamical development. A few unexplained incidents surpass these limits of credibility. I don't have any conclusions here other than to say that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, had these reports in their files for 73 years. They should have known what the hell was going on with these sightings. And we come out with this report, the DNI report, and yes, it is the same thing all over again. I didn't read anything in the DNI report that gave me any kind of a new twist on the UFO phenomenon that isn't in these old documents. They knew exactly what was going on with regard to these objects in the US, that they were something beyond US capability, or Russian, or Russia would have been, the Soviet Union would have been the only other country back then capable of competing with us on the world stage aerodynamically. It wasn't them. So this connection I'm making here has been brought out a little bit in some press and media accounts, but essentially people don't know about these documents, these old documents. And they should be holding some feet to fires here in the Defense Department, like, what have you been doing for 70 years? Or maybe they do know exactly what's going on. So we're in an X-Files land here. You can make a case for maybe both, both possibilities. They know all that's going on, or they know nothing. They've decided to ignore it. Okay, so yeah, go on to the next one. Okay. We'll hear a little bit more about pyramids. Go on to the next one, Sue. Thanks. Here's something I do at every, we're coming into our sightings. If you were disturbed by the other stuff, which you should be, you'll be disturbed by some of these sightings, so I'm not going to let you off the hook. So they're all interesting. I always like to give a little summary of where we stand with sightings. And you can see here that almost every year, it's California leads the country in sightings. And these are sightings to the MUFON case management system, okay, that MUFON runs. As of the end of October of this year, you can see up there, the total is given here, that it's 3,456 cases have been received by MUFON. And the National UFO Reporting Center, a one-man organization in Washington State, Seattle, I think, took in 2,400, almost 2,500 cases. California, Florida, and Texas, those states, because they have big populations, and some of them are wide open, they're huge states, and there's a lot of opportunity to see things. The number to the right, the first number for California, 386, is how many reports MUFON has gotten from California in the first 10 months of this year. The next number after the slash mark there is the number of unknown cases that have been found from those. So it would seem in my reading of this that if you want to see an unknown UFO, you have to go to Washington State. That's the highest percentage there of the 5 I've given. Maryland had 50 with 14 unexplained, and Virginia had 66 with 12 unexplained. So MUFON's looking into these things, and I don't say that to be funny or anything like that. They have 400 or 500 investigators, and they're churning these things out. Take my word for it. Okay, here's a graph I made, just showing you in visual form. 2020 versus 2021 sightings. The 2020 are in the blue, and I think the 2021 is a green color. I'm a little colorblind. There's a couple oddities on this thing, but a couple things you should know about is that every winter, sightings are seen more, reported more in the summer and warm weather months than they are in the winter. People are in the houses more in the winter, of course, outside more in the summer, so there's more chance to see something if you're outside looking. So it's always a little bit low like this. The graph is pretty almost kind of level. There's no huge surprises there. However, we can see in March and April of 2020 that the incoming sightings peaked up really high. And this really stands out when you see these things. Mark Rodiger of the Center for UFO Studies got interested in that. He wondered what kind of reports were producing those peaks. What was going on with that? So he and a university professor, a statistician, looked into the CMS cases for March and April, maybe even all summer of 2020, to figure out if they could see were these truly unknown cases or what was going on. But long story short, it turns out that those peaks are represented by the SpaceX satellites being sent up. Each launch lifts 60 Starlink satellites up, and they disperse in an odd, linear kind of a manner, and they produce a puzzling sight in the sky. And that's what produced those 2 bumps. But there was only one Starlink launch in April, there was one Starlink launch in March, there was one Starlink launch in February. Unlike this year, I think May had 4, but last year they only had 1. And we don't see these peaks, but for some reason people misinterpreted those in those 2 months, more Starlink satellites for UFOs. Sue will put the next graph up there. And so this is 2021 sightings versus unknowns. as of early November. You can see how they go. The unknowns stay relatively consistent. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of cases. The last month here, October, is going to be low because when I compiled this, it was November 2nd, and investigators haven't gotten to all the cases that were filed in October yet and written up their final reports on the dispositions of the cases, known or unknown or whatever. So that's going to be very low. But yeah, it's relatively consistent. I'm kind of proud of the people who are investigating cases. They seem to know what they're doing. Let's look at the next slide. This is a kind of an interesting one. This is just unknowns in 2020 and 2021. March and April, yeah, there were a few more unknown sightings compared to 2021, but they don't necessarily bespeak those big peaks we saw due to the Starlink stuff. So the unknowns, in other words, didn't go up in accordance with the big peaks we saw in incoming cases. It didn't follow proportionately. So I think most of the investigators tended to see through the reports by witnesses and identified Starlink satellites as the cause for their sighting reports. But we still had, a good number of unknowns coming in for these years. And you can go on to the next one. Okay, and another thing I have to just bring up a little bit here before I go into actual sightings, because the MADAR system, multiple anomaly detection and automatic recording, that's set up by a fellow named Fran Ridge in Indiana, now has sensors in, has 120 sensor packages. They're very small. They're about the size of a deck of cards or a cigarette pack. And they're not very large, or maybe one of these, like a 3x5 card, 4x6 card. They vary a little bit. He makes them in different sizes. And Fran Ridge has I don't think he's got quite every state covered in the union, but he's got 120 of these little boxes out. And I have one in our house, and people mount them in their homes. They can detect perturbations to the magnetic field. They can pick up, if you move the box or something causes the box to move, it can pick up that. It can pick up an increase in magnetic field strength outside in the area where the box is. And so it's got three kind of basic sensors in there, but nonetheless it's hooked up to the internet, and if something comes by to disturb the compass in your box, say, it's got an electronic compass somewhere in the box, and you'll see a picture of the box here shortly. If the compass deviates a certain amount of degrees one way or another from where it should be pointing, north I guess, it sets off an alarm, and Fran hears the alarm, gets an alarm on his computer. The owner of the box gets an alarm on their computer, and sometimes you can even have it ring a physical alarm so you can go running outside. I do not, for example, have that in our house. Anyhow, Fran Ridge has just come out with this book that's called Cap Point, and I just he was nice enough to send me a copy the other day. I didn't even know it was coming. I knew it was coming out, but I didn't know what it was out. And here it is. You can buy it on Amazon. Fran's been around the UFO world since the 1960s and worked with Richard Hall and NICAP back then in the 60s and 70s, and with MUFON for many, many years. And now he runs this MADAR operation. He can be found at nicap.org. NICAP.org is his website. And so we'll put the next slide up. And here's how the boxes are distributed around the United States and Canada. There's about, what did Fran say? There's about a dozen units in foreign countries. Canada's got some. I think Sweden, of all places, has some. I think there's one in Germany. France has one. The UK has one or two. And when I took a screenshot of this thing a couple weeks back, it just so happened that one of the boxes was triggered right when I took captured the screenshot. It turned red. I don't know what happened there. Maybe it was just someone bumped the box and moved it, and it caused it to go off. But curiously enough, it was box number 47 in Washington State. So, 1947 is the hallowed year of UFO research. But anyhow, or the UFO phenomenon. That's how they stack up here. And anyone that wants a box could get one. They cost a rather nominal amount. I think it's $200 or something like that. But Yeah, this network is just getting a little bit bigger, and I applaud Fran for doing what he's done here with this stuff. It's basically he runs this thing from his house. Okay, let's go into sightings now. That's, after all, why we're really here. We love UFO sightings, at least I think we do. I was talking with some people a while back, and kind of close friends of mine in the UFO field, and somebody said something like, oh, UFO sightings. Who cares about UFO sightings anymore? We're beyond that. We know what's going on. We know that they're non-human. Okay, I do believe that. But we don't want to hear about sightings anymore. But man, I keep being intrigued by sightings, and I completely disagree with that statement. And I'm here to speak with you, but man, I would love to give this kind of a report before an official scientific body of people who are not necessarily plugged into the UFO phenomenon, to show them what's going on. And to do that, I need reports. And I'm still at the level in ufology, when I interact with people, we still have to establish to the scientific community that there is a problem here. The DNI report helped. That is helping. But there's still a perception out there among mainstream people who don't attend conferences like this that it's basically all hogwash. Anyhow, that's a long way of saying why I'm showing you these sightings. But basically it's because I think they're pretty cool, and I picked out some kind of interesting ones. This particular one was an older case that was just submitted to MUFON in 2020, but it occurred in 1998 or 1999. This fellow and his son were returning. I got to go through these a little bit faster here, but my hour's not quite up. So I think I can get through most of the sightings for you. We're coming home from a football practice, and they passed by a water pumping station in a field. I'm not 100% sure what a water pumping station is, other than it's pumping water, I think maybe to irrigate the field. And we don't see those around here too much, I don't believe. And lo and behold, they noticed this like pickle-shaped object, or a cigar-shaped object, that was seemingly attached to one of these water pumping stations out in the field. That had lights along the extent of the thing, different colored lights that were sort of flashing or rotating around the thing, and it had a front light. Not that that matters where all these lights are. That's not going to give us a solution to the phenomenon. But it had a front light down here where it was attached. And the father thought the object was, sucking water out of this pumping thing. And again, this is not unheard of in UFO history. There are other cases like this where UFOs seem to be gathering water from something. Finally, the thing sort of detached, rose up in the air kind of slowly, angled up into the sky, and just disappeared. And the lights, I think the rotation of the lights picked up. But it was a pretty long thing. It was about 100 feet long, and some maybe 10 feet in diameter or so. Very strange. Manchester, Tennessee. One of these strange pyramid things. This woman was driving by in the evening, 9:20 or so in the evening, on July 15th of 2009, again, a little bit of an older case that I discovered in the CMS files, was driving to pick up her aunt they were going to go and see a movie. Suddenly, as she's driving along Highway 55, I guess it's outside of Manchester, she sees this pyramidal object hovering over the road. There were many cars on Highway 55 at that time. People started jamming on their brakes. There was almost an accident in front of them. One guy almost slammed into someone in front of him, all trying to see this thing, which was going about just over the treetops, 55 feet or so over the treetops along the side of the road, very close. She wanted to take a picture of it, but she couldn't because the traffic situation there was very dangerous. It was all she could do to just keep her eye on the object, and she proceeded down the road, and as she described these lights on the side of the object here. First of all, one face had 10 lights on it. Another face here had 3 lights on, red, green, and blue. I think the 10 lights were white. As she passed, and the angle between her and the UFO changed, she could see up under the UFO and said, "This pyramid is hollow." And she's an artist. So she said, "Oh, okay, I didn't take a picture of it, but I know I can replicate this thing in a drawing," which she did. Does this make any sense whatsoever? I don't pretend that it does. A hollow pyramid-shaped object flying? I mean, there's no source of lift. But anyhow, that's how these things are. That's the phenomenon. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh no, another flying pyramid. This one happened in 1995 in Manchester, not Manchester, England, but Uttoxeter, England, the UK. This fellow was going to work early in the morning, and he used a motorbike to get to his job. So he was out at 1 a.m. or something, driving to work on lonely roads outside there in Staffordshire, England, when suddenly the motor stops on his cycle, motorbike, I guess they call him there, and the bike stopped, and he thought, oh geez, you know, hopefully it's just something simple. A wire came out, I can just plug it back in. So he guided the thing over to the side of the road, started fiddling around with the thing, and he was suddenly bathed in this intense white light coming from above. He looked up and he saw what he initially described as a giant square hovering above him. He could see some kind of structure on the underside of that square, and bright lights were shining down, illuminating him. So it would have terrified you, Cindy, but nonetheless, there it was. And as slowly the pyramid started moving off across the land, and at that point he could see that it wasn't a square, it was this giant pyramid, and it just vanished into the distance. It was, each side of this thing was about 20 feet long, he thought. So let's see if I have anything else to tell you about it. Yeah, I do. So it was, he ended up having to walk back with this motorbike because he never could start it. That had to be a real bummer. And to make things worse, a couple days later he came down with a rather bad illness. He had a rash, stomach cramps, his vision worsened, he had tingling of the fingers. A doctor diagnosed a virus. Not a coronavirus, but just a virus, and that was 1995. And when the reporter who did that newspaper story went to interview the fellow, the guy had his bike there, he never could get it started. And the reporter took out like a Zippo lighter or something like that, and I don't know what he was, maybe he thought it might be magnetic, but anyhow, the lighter, he says in the article, was pulled out of his hand and it stuck to the side of the motorcycle. So apparently the motorcycle was highly magnetized. Again, not something that UFO researchers haven't run into over the years. They have. So, very unusual sighting. These are the only two pyramidal sightings I'm aware of, and you can be assured that I'm going to keep my eye out for any more that I find. And Sue put on there another, it was an artist rendition of the same sighting that appeared in a recent book that just came out. I said to Sue, we don't need two sightings of a pyramid. The first one does it, but she loved the artistic atmosphere of that second picture, so it stays in. This Zion, Utah case, I actually have something to show you that's a real UFO maybe, and it'll move. This was taken by the pilot of an airliner flying about 40,000 feet over Zion, Utah. And there it is. About 50-second video. You'll see no wings on that thing, at least I can't see any. I can't see anything like engines or a vertical stabilizer or anything like that. And we've all seen aircraft pass below our aircraft we're traveling in. They don't quite look like that. It was 16 or 17 nautical miles away at an angle, and unfortunately the pilot didn't alert the co-pilot to it, so the co-pilot did not see the thing. But the pilot grabbed his cell phone and took video. It was in sight for about 3 minutes. So this was not something that disappeared in a second. It was there for a while. And the pilot himself could never, it was a commercial airliner, he could never, he himself just sort of shrugged his shoulders. I don't know what the hell I just saw, but there you have it there. Let's go to the next one here. Oh, another one, very much the same. This one was taken almost a year ago over Idaho. In this case, it was a pilot who was flying as a passenger who took the picture. The last case, we had the actual pilot take the picture. So, as he was flying, he saw this thing outside the aircraft, and he said it was clearly defined when he saw it and took the picture. It didn't have sort of fuzzy ends like that. It was and this is a cropped picture. The original one, you can see it a little bit. It looks a little more blurred on the ends. But he said it wasn't like that at the time he took the picture. He panned it, and maybe he was a little off on his panning speed. But it didn't have wings, as you can see. It didn't have empennage, the vertical stabilizer and horizontal stabilizers in the back. No visible markings on the plane, windows, or anything like this, if indeed it was a plane. He couldn't tell how fast it was moving relative to his aircraft, which was headed towards Seattle. But nonetheless, it passed below. I believe there were several witnesses who were with him at the time. He said it was very well defined to his eyes, and that he said that I was kind of weirded out by it. And that's all I have for you on that one. But I will say that I've stood here within a few feet of this place in past lectures and shown cases that had the identical kind of objects that have been taken from aircraft or from the ground of something that looks exactly like these white cylinders, white tubes, whatever you want to call them, cigar-shaped objects. These are not rare in UFO sightings. Not technically a UFO case, this one, but I couldn't resist this. This may give us some clue into what's going on. This is sort of a Fortean sighting. This case occurred in La Crosse, Washington, not La Crosse, Wisconsin, by a 23-year-old man who was out walking his dog late at night. Yeah, right in the morning. And he's walking in an area there as a residential, kind of a residential area. There was a field on his left, and I think there was a field on his right, and it was semi-rural along the street. Street lights are there. Suddenly the dog pulls at the leash and just adopts an alert status. And he looks up and he sees 8 tiny beings, about a foot to a foot and a half tall, dragging a dead cat on a cord across the street in front of him. Needless to say, gobsmacked is only one of the words that you would have been. And behind the 8 beings, there were 2 smaller ones that he thought seemed to serve as lookouts, because one of those the 2 beings squeaked, and immediately they all looked over at him, and they started to drag the cat faster across the street. Oh no, busted. And they were nude. They were completely nude. They were all male, and all for a foot and a half tall. He said they were well-muscled males, and he said they were very annoyed at me, because he could tell they were very annoyed that I was there and caught them, dragging this cat across the road. He stood there, and they picked up their pace. They dragged the cat into this field, at which point a vertical line appeared in the air. The vertical line expanded to form a square, I guess. They all marched into that square, and it closed behind them, and they were gone. The dead cat with them. This is an unsophisticated witness here. He was a young man. He hadn't finished high school. He did work about town. He doesn't seem to have any vested interest in making something like this up. A very, very odd case. Does this give us a clue as to what's going on with the UFOs in general? Maybe. They do sometimes vanish, and they're not often seen to go into an opening like that. But nonetheless, if anybody here knows of a case, maybe someone like Larry Arnold might, in fairy lore and everything like this, of people who in the 1800s or in the 1900s saw a UFO, saw beings. I'd like to know if they ever saw them dragging a dead something with them, who knows what. But I'd like to find a correlation to this case. And I'll go over one more case here. There's not that many left here. I'll go over 2 more because they're both the same kind. I'll call it quits for now. And this case occurred in England, Macclesfield, United Kingdom, by a man who got up in the night. He couldn't sleep. He was walking around his living room. He looked up through his through the window and could see this trapezoid. Well, trapezoid. It's an octahedron object hovering above the skylight there in the sky, maybe 10 feet above it. It had a kind of a non-smooth surface that was a matte black color. What to make of that? He watched it for quite a while. It didn't do anything. It just remained there. He's sort of a good artist, and that's a nice rendition. But then he really had to go to the bathroom. When he came back, he made it quick. But the thing was, you guessed it, gone when he came back. And the last case I'll have here is, oh no, another octahedron. Fort Myers, Florida. This woman was outside on her lanai early in the evening on May 17th, 2021, just this year. around 7:30 or so in the evening, and saw a bright light maneuvering off to the side. She wondered what it was. She walked out into the middle of her lawn. The thing passed right overhead, and she picked this shape off the web. This is not her artwork. It was something she picked that was representative of what she saw. But basically, it's two four-sided pyramids with the bases together, and it had a blinking. The top would blink and on and off, and the bottom would blink on and off, and it just vanished into the distance. Again, I'll close with this. Do flying jewel-shaped objects make any sense aerodynamically? No, they do not. She wants, well, how much time do I have, Peter? A minute?
Way over.
Way over, okay. Well, why don't I call it a quiz? My intention was not to go way over. That was a Madar box you're looking at. But anyhow, flying jewel-shaped objects are not new in UFO sightings history, jewel-shaped things. I have no idea how that's done. It makes no sense whatsoever, but witnesses keep reporting these things over the decades. They come in at a low rate, but they do come in. And that's all I have to say to you here today. Actually, I did have a little bit more, but you've got the gist of it. Thank you. Thank you, Sue.